Hi, I'm Delara. I work in counterintelligence for the CIA, trained to detect deception, dismantle threats, survive the unspeakable. But nothing prepared me for my own family. This Thanksgiving, they told me I was worth $10 million. Then they fed me poisoned turkey, toasted to my memory, and filed the death certificate while I was still breathing. They staged a funeral, while I sat in the back row watching them cry. How does a family get that far? What happens when the people who raised you plan to bury you before you're dead? Would you have seen it coming? The invitation came in an email, buried between promotional offers and a digital bank alert. Please come home for once, it read, followed by a decorative turkey emoji and an RSVP link. But what caught my attention wasn't the message, it was the name. Delara. My name's Delara, and anyone who's ever really known me wouldn't make that mistake. I sat staring at that screen longer than I'd like to admit. It had been 5 years since I last crossed the threshold of that house in Bethesda. 5 years since the Thanksgiving when Zinnia laughed too loud at my career update and Malis told me, with a sweet smile and steel in her voice, "Not everything you do needs to be a flex, darling." 5 years since I quietly picked up my coat, drove back to Langley, and didn't look back. Yet here I was, standing in front of their perfectly manicured lawn, holding a bottle of wine I didn't even want to give them. The porch light flickered on automatically, motion sensing, not intentional. I checked my phone again. No missed calls, no texts to follow up, just that email with its typo and its implication. You owe us a visit. The door opened before I knocked. Look what the wind blew in, Zinnia chirped, wearing one of those cream-colored sweaters influencers swear by. She gave me a quick hug, dry and hollow, like a sales pitch wrapped in yarn. Come in! We didn't think you'd actually show. I stepped inside and the scent of rosemary and something lemony wrapped around me like a noose. It smelled calculated. The dining room looked like a lifestyle magazine shoot, centerpiece of miniature pumpkins and tapered candles, cloth napkins folded into little swans, printed place cards. Except for me, I scanned the table. Everyone had a seat. Everyone except me. Malis, seated at the head of the table, sipped from her wine glass as if this entire arrangement hadn't been choreographed in advance. "Oh, Delara," she said, waving vaguely toward the empty chair closest to the kitchen door and trash bin. "Sit there, sweetheart. We weren't sure you'd actually join, so we didn't assign you a spot." I took the chair in silence. CIA training teaches you how to read a room. Seating arrangement, proximity, line of sight, it all speaks louder than words. And in this house, everything was screaming. Ellery barely looked up from his tablet. "Still in D.C.?" he asked. "Langley," I said. He grunted. "Government pay these days must be something." I didn't bother replying. Zinnia had already launched into a tale about her latest gala, a fundraiser for art therapy in prisons. Malis beamed with pride as if Zinnia had cured cancer. No one asked me about work again. I tried, at one point, to ask about Eska, Zinnia's daughter. She changed the subject so fast you'd think I'd brought up a family scandal. Forks clinked against plates. Wine glasses refilled like clockwork. Laughter came easy to them, like it had been rehearsed. I stayed quiet, observing. If this were an op, I'd be the asset flagged for extraction, visible but expendable. At one point, Malis lifted her glass. "To family," she said, voice smooth as polished marble. "And those who return, finally." Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone drank. I didn't. There was something in the air, something just under the surface. And it wasn't just the wine. The air in the dining room thickened after Malis's toast. No one said it outright, but the message rang clear. I was the outsider in a family that had closed ranks long ago. I hadn't touched my wine, and not because I didn't drink. It just didn't feel safe. I pushed a string bean around my plate and listened to Zinnia regale the table with another story about her latest charity event, something involving a silent auction and healing crystals for incarcerated youth. She always had a way of spinning superficial gestures into selfless sainthood. That sounds productive, I said, my tone flat. No one acknowledged it. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to seem eager. I was promoted last month, I offered, Deputy Director of Counterintelligence. It's been... Zinnia cut me off with a wave of her hand and a laugh too loud for the quiet room. Let's not bore everyone with work stuff, okay? I swear, every time she visits, it's like being dragged into a government briefing. Ellery chuckled without looking up from his plate. She's always been intense. Even as a kid, she couldn't just play pretend, had to know where the dragons came from. A few light laughs floated around the table, but Melis didn't join in. Instead, she dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and turned to Zinnia. Tell us more about the donors. Wasn't that senator's wife there? I sat back, blinking slowly. The warmth that should have come from sharing something personal evaporated. I felt like a ghost in the room, visible, but completely unacknowledged. I thought you wanted to know what I do now, I said, quieter than I intended. Zinnia turned her eyes toward me, her voice syrupy. We wanted to know if you're still you. Whatever that meant. I glanced around the room. My seat was near the swinging door to the kitchen, directly next to the trash bin. Every other seat had a name card, polished silverware, and water poured without asking. Mine, a paper napkin, and an empty glass. Then something caught my eye above the fireplace, a photograph mounted in a thick gold frame. It was us, or it should have been. Thanksgiving from years ago. Melis at the head of the table, Ellery mid-laugh, Zinnia in a white blouse, center of the shot. But not me. I wasn't there. Except, I remembered that day. I remembered that blouse because I'd lent it to Zinnia after she spilled wine on hers. I remembered taking the photo. My stomach tightened. Where's the rest of that photo? I asked, staring at it. Melis didn't even glance up. That is the photo. No, I remember. She finally looked at me. It looked better symmetrical. There it was, not a slip of the tongue, a deliberate excision. I didn't flinch, just picked up my fork again and took a breath. In counterintelligence, you learn fast. When someone shows you how little you matter, you don't react. You remember. I scanned the table again with new eyes. Zinnia was the mouthpiece, flashy, loud, deflecting. Melis was the real operator, curating stories, controlling atmosphere. Ellery, background noise. If this were a covert operation, I was the detainee and they were the interrogators. Warm room, soft questions, hard truths buried under passive remarks. You know, Zinnia said suddenly, raising her glass, let's toast to the ones who've stayed consistent and those who wandered back. The wine sloshed in glasses around the table. Melis smiled as if she were in on some private joke. Ellery raised his glass with a half nod. Everyone laughed. I stared at the candlelight, catching the edge of the knife beside my plate. They weren't trying to welcome me. They were trying to erase me. Politely, I sat alone on the edge of the guest bed, a thin blanket draped over my knees and a half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie on a napkin beside me. The TV was on but muted, some old rerun flickering without sound. I couldn't recall the characters, only that their pretend laughter felt louder than anything in this house had all night. I caught my reflection in the darkened window above the dresser. Tired eyes, shoulders drawn tight. A version of me I didn't recognize but somehow had grown into. I whispered almost involuntarily, How did I end up back here? The question wasn't about the physical act of returning. It was about everything that led to the moment I was sitting in a house where my name was misspelled on an invitation and my chair was next to the trash. My mind wandered back to the dinner table, to Ellery tipping his second glass of red wine like he was celebrating something only he understood. He had leaned back in his chair, loosened his collar slightly, and looked right at me with a lazy grin. "You know," he said, glancing at Zinnia for confirmation, "the insurance guys say your policy's up to 10 million now. That's quite the send-off, huh?" Zinnia giggled, shaking her head like he was some harmless old man. Malis didn't miss a beat. "Well," she said with a sip of wine, "it's good to know our daughter's life is worth something." There had been laughter then, light, unbothered, like someone had cracked a joke about the weather. At the time, I'd smiled faintly, because I hoped, it was just a poorly timed joke. Now, sitting here in the hush of a house where nothing truly rested, I realized they weren't joking, not even close. Earlier that day, just after I arrived, I had seen Tallis in the hallway, my childhood friend, now their family lawyer. We'd shared birthday parties, scraped knees, secrets whispered under staircases. Back then, she was the only one who believed me when I said Zinnia stole my science fair idea in 8th grade. "Hey," I'd said when I saw her. She froze just slightly, then smiled too tight. "Delara, you look well." "You knew I was coming?" "I heard." She checked her watch. "Sorry, I've got a call coming in. Catch you later, okay?" And just like that, she was gone. No hug, no warmth, just guilt hiding behind professionalism. When a friend avoids you, it's rarely because they're busy. It's because they're compromised or scared. I stared at the pie again and pushed it aside. I wasn't hungry, not for this. Lying back on the bed, I started mentally sorting through every interaction since I stepped into that house. The comments, the photograph, the dinner seating, Tallis, the toast. There had been no single moment of betrayal. It had been layered, built, threaded like a quiet operation executed over years. It wasn't that I had changed. It was that I stopped performing. The medals on my office wall, the missions I never spoke of, the nights I disappeared without a word. That wasn't the Delara they wanted. They wanted a version of me that smiled quietly at Zinnia's achievements and sat in silence while Malis narrated family history like a curated podcast. I grabbed the journal I always traveled with and wrote in sharp, pressed strokes. "In a family where truth is rude, silence becomes currency." I closed the journal and stood. Years in the field had taught me to recognize patterns, and what I was experiencing wasn't confusion. It was protocol, planned obfuscation. They were executing something, a plan I wasn't meant to see coming. So I did what I'd been trained to do. I pulled my bag from under the bed, unzipped the hidden pocket, and took out the recorder, small, black, silent. I crouched under the dining table, tucking it into the underside lip of the wood where no one would think to look. The angle would catch most voices. It didn't need to be perfect, just present. I pressed the record button. Standing, I whispered into the room, "Time to hear what they say when they think I'm not listening." The house was silent when I woke. Not the comforting kind of silence, but the sort that wraps itself around you like fog, thick, waiting. I slipped out of bed, my feet touching the cold floorboards, and walked toward the kitchen. The lights were already on. Too early for that. Everything looked staged. The countertops were wiped down, not a speck of flour or crumb out of place. The fruit bowl had been rearranged, green apples on the outside, red inside. The knife set was aligned like a military drill. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. There was no sound of drawers opening, no footsteps overhead, just stillness. My gut told me something was off, and I'd long since learned to trust it. I opened the fridge, pretending to look for juice, and spotted the container with the leftover turkey. I hadn't touched it last night, but I remembered the taste from dinner. Something metallic had lingered on my tongue longer than it should have. I'd chalked it up to stress or a bad wine pairing. Now I wasn't so sure. I pulled the foil back. The smell was slightly off. Faint. Chemical. Not strong enough to alert someone casually eating it, but obvious if you knew what to look for. I checked the trash. Buried beneath paper towels and wilted greens was an empty packet. Nothing fancy, no brand name, just a sterile label. But the compound listed was unmistakable. I'd seen it before during an agency simulation. Mimics cardiac distress, nearly untraceable if you didn't know where to dig. They didn't poison me to kill me. They wanted it to look like I'd just stopped. I stood there for a full minute, the packet in one hand, the other gripping the edge of the counter. My mind shifted into gear. Not panic, not emotion, strategy, analysis. I tossed the packet back in, deeper this time, rewrapped the turkey, wiped the counter again, slower. I didn't need them to know I knew. Not yet. Instead of breakfast, I made tea. Chamomile. Something to hold in my hands while I thought. I opened the pantry, made noise deliberately, filled the kettle slowly. I didn't trust the silence anymore, but I could use it. Before leaving the kitchen, I placed a decoy bug under the fruit bowl, another under the hallway lamp. If they were monitoring me, they'd get what they expected, me, still too naive to suspect anything. I made my way upstairs to the guest room, sat at the desk, logged into my bank account. Temporary access denied, pending identity verification due to recent death notice. The screen stayed still, no flicker, no refresh, just those words. I swallowed, not out of fear but to slow my breath. My hands were steady. That was the training. They filed it. They actually filed it. Suddenly, Melissa's voice from 2 nights ago clicked into place. At least something good would come of it. My death wasn't just fantasy. It was paperwork now. Protocol. Processed like a form in a government queue. I backed out of the site, pulled up a secured cloud system, and started uploading everything. IDs, tax records, contract scans. I didn't know how long I'd have access, but I knew I wasn't letting them write me out without a trail. They weren't just hoping I'd disappear, they were preparing for it. I pulled a notepad from my bag and began mapping it out. Melis, social authority, emotional leverage. Ellery, financial handler, motive-driven. Zinnia, image manager, distraction. Talus, legal channel, plausible deniability. In this operation, I wasn't the daughter, I was the target. I closed the pad, folded it into my coat pocket, and made my way back downstairs. That evening, during dinner, some contrived casserole no one touched, I looked Melis in the eye. Her pearls gleamed under the chandelier. "You filed my death," I said calmly. "That's not something I'll forget." She smiled, unbothered. "Delara, darling, you've always had a flair for dramatics." Their voices slipped through the walls like steam, low, fast, clipped. I stood in the hallway just outside the living room, shoes in my hand, listening. "She's too calm," Zinnia whispered. "It's not natural. People don't come back from silence like that." "She's probably medicated," Ellery muttered, dismissive. "That place, Langley, changes people." "I told you this would get messy," Melis said flatly. "We should have kept it simple, let her feel loved, distant. But now?" I stepped into the room. Melis was mid-sentence when the hush fell like a dropped vase. She looked up slowly, her expression resetting into a smile a second too late. "Don't stop on my account," I said. My voice was even, my hands relaxed at my sides. "I'd hate to miss a moment of this performance." They stared. I let the pause sit just long enough to sting, then turned and walked toward the kitchen without another word. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water and with my back to the doorway, let the image replay again in my mind. Zinnia's face, caught between guilt and calculation. Ellery's slight nod, like I'd proven a point he never said aloud. Melis's eyes, measuring, already calculating the next move. What they didn't know was that I'd already taken my countermeasure the night of that odd taste on my tongue. I had sat on the cool tile of the guest bathroom floor, back pressed against the tub, unzipped the emergency pocket in my travel bag, and retrieved my field issue antidote. I followed the protocol I knew by heart. Steady hands, even breathing, the faint warmth spreading through my chest as the serum kicked in. I didn't panic. I observed. The antidote worked, but what came next would require something stronger than adrenaline. It would require precision. By dinner, I was back in my seat as if nothing had happened. No one noticed the shade lighter in my skin or the way I avoided the wine. Now, seated again across from Melis, I gently placed my cloth napkin on my lap and waited until the conversation lulled. "Quick question," I said, looking directly at her. "Have you updated my life insurance recently?" Ellery coughed on his drink. Melis didn't flinch. "That's a strange thing to ask," she said with a small smile. "It's strange," I replied, "to find out your death has been preemptively documented." "Delara," Ellery said, trying to sound firm but failing, "that's a sensitive topic." I kept my eyes on Melis. "So, is being the only person at this table who knows they were supposed to be dead by now?" Silence blanketed the room. Zinnia tried to lighten the mood. "Let's shift gears, yeah. Actually, funny thing. Part of our charity's new project is restoring an old cemetery. Beautiful space, really. Historic. We even arranged a family lot." She smiled. Too proud. Too oblivious. "You'll love this part," she added. "Your name's there too. We thought it was thoughtful." "You bought me a grave?" I asked. Zinnia blinked. "Well, not just you. It's a family plot." I set down my fork. "Before I was gone?" Melis folded her napkin. "Planning isn't malicious, Delara. It's responsible." No one laughed, not even Ellery. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, thick, labeled. I placed it on the table without ceremony and flipped it open. "This," I said, spreading out the documents, "is my living will, updated, legal, and filed independently." They watched as I slid copies of notarized paperwork across the table. "I'm not here to ask for your approval," I continued. "I'm here to make sure the next time you write me off, it's fiction, not fact." Zinnia's jaw tightened. Ellery didn't lift his eyes. Melis leaned back slowly, her lips parting into a smirk. "Are you threatening us, dear?" I looked straight at her. "No," I said quietly. "I'm informing you, because next time you won't get a warning." The house felt hollow, not empty, just hollow. Like it had been scrubbed of anything real. I sat at the end of the dining table alone, my notebook open, pen resting in my hand, the same page unread for 15 minutes. The silence was suspicious, almost coordinated. In intelligence, when things go that quiet, you don't relax. You listen harder. I got up slowly, crossed to the corner where I'd placed the recorder the night before. My fingers worked fast, practiced, flipping it off and plugging in a small jack that connected to my noise-canceling headphones. It clicked on. Playback began. At first, the sound of plates and forks. Then voices, Familiar, muffled, but clear. Malus. It's all filed. Once it processes, we can grieve publicly. Ellery. She always wanted control. Now she'll die, proving she never had any. Zinnia's voice was the softest and the sharpest. She's an artifact, she said. She doesn't fit anymore. Let's not act like this wasn't overdue. I paused the recorder. They hadn't just tried to erase me. They'd rehearsed how they'd mourn me. I felt my chest tighten, not from shock, but from clarity. They had planned every inch of it, what they'd say, how they'd look, where they'd position themselves in the narrative. I wasn't just forgotten. I was budgeted. I uploaded the audio file to a secure drive, password encrypted it, and printed 3 transcript copies with timestamps. One I folded into a sealed envelope marked with my initials and slipped it into the glove box of my car. Just in case. If they thought I was weakened, they'd misunderstood the quiet. I hadn't stayed silent because I was broken. I stayed silent to observe how deep they were willing to bury me. From the dining room, I headed into the den and logged into the home's security panel, pulling the backup logs. Empty. Every file from the past 48 hours had been wiped manually. I scrolled through the system timestamp logs and found what I expected. Zinnia's login credentials at 2:16 a.m., twice. One labeled temporary maintenance, the other system refresh. I closed the laptop slowly and made my way into the garden, where Zinnia was sipping coffee alone on a bench near the hedge. She looked up when I approached. "You've learned a lot from those social media cleanups," I said, casually. She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The cameras. You deleted the footage, but you missed one thing." She straightened. "Dilara, I have no idea what you're implying. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional." "You mean someone like Talus?" Zinnia's face flickered, surprised I remembered the name, or that I'd say it aloud. "You always imagine enemies where there are none," she said sweetly, standing up and brushing non-existent dust from her coat. "And you always underestimate how closely I watch patterns." I walked away before she could respond. Upstairs, I pulled out a burner laptop from my travel case and connected to the CIA secure line. I typed a single encrypted message to a trusted internal contact. "Possible tampering in civilian death proxy. Quiet review requested. No signature, just the facts." I initiated the fallback plan I'd prepped months ago, one designed not for survival, but for resurrection. Later that night, at dinner, Malus sat directly across from me. She was back in pearls, her face placid, eyes unreadable. "You're quiet today," she said over her glass of wine. I met her gaze without blinking. "So were the tapes," I said. "But they hurt enough. The flowers were too perfect. White roses folded into impossible spirals, nestled in low glass bowls. Tablecloths were ivory, not cream. The lighting was diffused just enough to flatter every cheekbone in the room. Zinnia had orchestrated the entire charity brunch like a film set, and I was meant to be the tragic subplot no one would mention until the third act. I'd been urged to attend, of course. The phrasing was soft, but the expectation was sharp. Malus said, "It would be nice if you made an appearance. You're still family, after all." Still family, like a relic on a shelf they forgot to dust. I stood outside the venue a full 5 minutes before going in. I wasn't wearing black. I wasn't even wearing neutral. I wore navy, structured, buttoned to the collar. It said, "I'm watching, and I'm not here for applause." Inside, the noise swirled, clinking glasses, curated laughter, the scent of catered quiche and rosewater-scented napkins. I moved along the perimeter of the room like a ghost, watching her own wake. That had been the plan all along. 2 days earlier, I had walked myself into the ER, short of breath and pale. Chest tight. The symptoms were real enough, induced by stress maybe, or by what I now believed had been a carefully measured dose of something foreign in my system. I let them hook me up, draw blood, monitor heart rhythms. I stayed for observation, knowing exactly what would happen next. Because while I lay in that hospital bed, one of my agency contacts pulled the hospital's access logs. Another flagged the insurance servers. I didn't need proof I was being watched. I needed confirmation of who was watching and why. Let them believe I was breaking down. The moment someone thinks you've fallen apart is the exact moment they stop looking over their shoulder. Back in the venue, Zinnia stood at the front with a microphone, radiant in a pastel silk blouse. Her voice trembled as she began. "Our family knows loss," she said. "We've lost too many, too soon." The crowd leaned in. Some dabbed their eyes. Cameras clicked. "She was brilliant, but restless," Zinnia continued. "She never stayed in one place long enough to feel rooted, but she was loved, deeply." I was sitting 2 blocks away, watching the live stream from a cafe booth. I stirred my coffee with a slow hand. Every word felt rehearsed, measured for sympathy, not sincerity. She wasn't mourning me, she was auditioning. Then another voice came through the speaker. It took me a second to place it. Softer now, worn with time. Aaron, my old flame. Now a community pastor, of all things. They'd brought him to speak? "She was haunted," he said, looking out at the audience. "But we tried to help her. We really did." My stomach clenched. He hadn't seen me in years. I'd broken that off long before the agency ever came calling. And now he was up there, using my name like it belonged to the public. I picked up my phone and typed one word, pawn. He faltered mid-sentence. Eyes dropped to his phone. A beat of silence. Then he said something generic about grace and sat down. The audience applauded. I closed the live stream. In the bathroom of the cafe, I looked at myself in the mirror, calm, contained. The lighting overhead didn't flatter. It didn't need to. I opened my phone again, uploaded screenshots, insurance claim timestamps, hospital logs, a still from the live stream. I captioned the post. "Some funerals are staged before the body is cold." I didn't publish it, not yet. Let them finish clapping first. I left the cafe and walked to the venue. The crowd was thinning, smiles wide, makeup fresh. Mayless stood by the catering table, sipping champagne and posing for a photo. She hadn't even spoken today. She didn't need to. I walked past the valet stand and toward the doors. Heads turned. I wasn't wearing black. I wasn't here to grieve. If they were throwing me a funeral, I might as well be there for it. They held it in a rented chapel in Georgetown, sleek and cold like a law office with better lighting, rows of neatly aligned pews, soft organ music piped through hidden speakers. Every detail whispered solemnity, respect, grief, except it wasn't real. I stood just beyond the doors, wrapped in my crimson coat like armor. No one saw me at first. The hush inside was punctuated only by heels tapping, tissue crinkling, camera shutters trying to stay discreet. I stepped inside, unannounced, silent. Heads didn't turn immediately, but when they did, they turned in waves. "Is that?" someone whispered, too loud. Their words didn't matter. I'd already said mine, just by being there. They threw a funeral to bury me, and I came to see who danced. Zinnia stood at the front, a vision of curated elegance. She wiped beneath her eye with a monogrammed handkerchief, too gently to catch an actual tear. She was complicated, she said into the microphone, voice cracking at the edges. "But we loved her." The room murmured agreement. Mayless sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with deliberate timing, never once smearing her lipstick. Ellery was beside her, stone-faced. the image of respectable loss. From the shadow of a side column I watched. They weren't mourning me, they were auditioning for sympathy. I waited for the exact moment Zinnia said the word legacy. Then I walked into the center aisle. Gasps echoed like dominoes tipping. Someone whispered my name. A woman screamed. Malis dropped her program. Zinnia's body stilled. Ellery's hands clenched just slightly against his knees. I didn't break stride. I reached the front, turned to face the crowd. Calm, measured, and then I pulled a remote from my coat pocket and turned toward the projection screen behind the podium. The projector clicked to life. Audio first, static, then Malis's voice. It's all filed. Once it processes, we can grieve publicly. Ellery's voice followed. She always wanted control. Now she'll die, proving she never had any. And Zinnia's soft, surgical finish. Let's not act like this wasn't overdue. A hush swallowed the chapel. Next slide, a freeze frame of Zinnia's live stream from her gala, the one where she accepted a community award while my insurance claim timestamp hovered in the corner of the screen. This, I said quietly, facing them, is what love looks like when you monetize grief. Someone in the audience stood. A few phones went up. The pastor stepped forward, confusion on his face. I won't be a part of this, he said quietly, stepping away from the podium. Zinnia moved first. Delara, she started, voice high-pitched and breathy. We didn't know. We thought. You knew, I said, turning to her. You just hoped I wouldn't. I looked at Malis. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was the same weapon she'd always used. The attendees shifted uncomfortably. Some edged toward the aisles. The truth was heavier than they expected. I turned away from the screen. My voice didn't rise. You buried me because you couldn't control me. I picked up the handout from a nearby pew, a program with my name on it, printed beneath the words, "In loving memory." I folded it once, clean, and placed it back on the podium. No one stopped me as I walked down the center aisle, past the pews, past the people who had gathered to mourn someone they'd never cared to understand. At the doorway, I paused. Funeral's over, I said. The reckoning's just begun. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the blinds of the hotel suite like it didn't know, or didn't care, what had unraveled the night before. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at a storm I hadn't created, just detonated. Delara Thorne Crash's own funeral was trending. Screenshots of me mid-aisle, red coat blazing, mouth open in measured indictment, were everywhere. Some articles blurred my face, most didn't. The caption underneath said it all. She walked into her own funeral. My inbox was flooded. Texts, emails, missed calls, 1 from the agency, 3 from Vera, a handful from numbers I didn't recognize, and then, finally, 1 from Talus. You were right, she wrote. They filed everything under forged documents. Death cert was signed before your ER visit timestamp. Attached was a PDF, scan of the certificate, complete with fake physician name, county seal, and all. Legal status, pending reversal. They hadn't just erased me. They tried to profit from my disappearance, and it worked, until it didn't. I set the phone down and exhaled, long and slow, then turned on the TV. Local station, muted. Footage of the chapel zoomed in on Malis's face as she left the building. Her signature smile faltered just enough. The headline crawled beneath. Thorne family faces scrutiny over alleged insurance fraud. Justice doesn't always come in thunderclaps. Sometimes it comes in slow, steady ripples. By noon, a video clip of Malis had gone viral. She was in the kitchen 2 days before, speaking to someone off camera. If she were gone, she'd said, At least the money would go somewhere useful. No one had known it was being recorded, but someone sent it anonymously to the state insurance board. The fallout came fast. Zinnia's sponsorship deals crumbled one by one. Her charity board suspended her. Her website, once a glossy spread of feel-good branding, now redirected to a blank screen. And then came the twist, even I hadn't predicted. Vera forwarded me a batch of documents late that afternoon. Internal insurance communications traced back to the claim submission. The payout wasn't going to Malis or Ellery. It was going to a woman named Nina Corley. I knew that name. She was Ellery's high school sweetheart, a short-lived affair from decades ago. I remembered her perfume, the kind that filled a room before she spoke. Ellery's motive hadn't just been money, it had been freedom. He planned my funeral like a financial rebranding, a clean slate, a payout with a personal footnote. He wasn't cashing in on a death. He was rewriting his future without me in it. The disgust rose slowly, not like fire, but like concrete setting in my chest. That evening, I met with my agency contact at a quiet cafe just off M Street. He wore the same neutral expression I'd come to expect. "Want to press formal charges?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let them sweat." "I want to see who runs, who starts pointing fingers." He nodded. "You'll be protected." "I already am," I replied. As we walked out, I saw a mother and daughter crossing the street. The girl held her mom's hand and swung it side to side like it was the best thing in the world. I didn't flinch, I didn't ache. I just watched them go. Back at the hotel, I took the long way to the elevator, cleared my phone notifications, deleted the ones I didn't care about, replied to Vera with a thumbs-up emoji, sent Tallis a single sentence, "I'll take it from here." Just as I stepped into the hallway, my burner phone buzzed. Unknown number, just a text. "I know what they missed. Call me." I sat in a downtown cafe just off 14th Street, the kind with black tile floors and chairs that looked uncomfortable on purpose. My coffee had gone cold, but the laptop screen in front of me burned with satisfaction. The post was drafted. "How to Stage a Funeral for the Living." Underneath the title, clips, timestamps, documents, evidence of a conspiracy dressed in pearls and designer grief. Screenshots of the forged death certificate. Insurance filings submitted while I was still hooked up to EKGs in the hospital. A freeze frame of Zinnia accepting an award for an initiative she never built, smiling into a spotlight she stole. I scheduled the post for 9 a.m. sharp. Let them wake up to their own headlines. I checked the clock. 8:52. The seconds ticked like teeth clenching. Across the cafe, a young woman laughed too loudly into her phone, completely unaware of the digital wreckage I was about to unleash. It was almost funny. The world spun on, even while some parts of it crumbled. I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back. At 9:01, my phone began buzzing. 5 notifications in 10 seconds. Zinnia's public-facing page had gone dark. Her sponsors were reviewing affiliations. A community board member leaked an email chain admitting the initiative they honored her for, mental health outreach to military families, had been my idea, my blueprint, stolen years ago and repackaged as her redemption arc. "I gave her my ideas," I whispered. She turned them into applause. But it wasn't applause now. It was silence, and silence wasn't golden anymore. It was damning. By noon, the post had hit 2 million views, and then, unexpectedly, came the message from Eska. It was a video sent from a child's email account. No subject line. The clip opened on Eska in her room, soft toy tucked beside her, hair half brushed like someone stopped mid-routine. She looked at the camera with her big, serious eyes and said, "Mommy and Grandma said they'd be happier when Aunt Delara's quiet forever." The room in the video was peaceful. The voice wasn't angry, just a child repeating what she'd heard. It gutted me, not because I was surprised, but because it had come from the one person I hoped might stay clean in all this. And still, there was relief. They didn't just betray me. They left a trail. Even in their control, they forgot children listen when no one thinks they do. I replayed the clip 3 times, then stored it on an encrypted drive. Later that afternoon, I met Tallis in the back booth of a quiet restaurant in Foggy Bottom. She looked exhausted, maybe ashamed. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Everything I could find," she said, "and this one's from me." I didn't open it. Instead, I handed her an identical envelope. "Use it if they try again," I said. Back at my apartment, I recorded a video of my own. I didn't plan to release it, at least not yet. It was insurance, not for them, but for the people who still believed. "I was never asking for their seat at the table," I said into the camera. "They thought I needed it, but I'm building my own." I saved the file, turned off the light, and let the room settle around me. Just as I poured myself a glass of water, my burner phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "Vera, turn on the TV. You're going to want to see this." The morning after the exposé felt quieter than I expected. Not the eerie kind of silence I'd gotten used to in my family's house, but the kind that came from within. I sat on my apartment's worn couch in Arlington, wrapped in a sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of detergent, cradling a chipped mug of coffee. The television flickered in the background, muted. A looping clip of Melis and Zinnia leaving a federal building played silently, sunglasses on, shoulders stiff. A reporter shoved a microphone forward, shouting something that was probably brutal. I didn't need to hear it. I knew the cadence of public reckoning. It didn't start with screaming. It started with avoidance. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from Tallis. "We're winning." Slowly, lawfully. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened the small storage box I kept under the bookshelf. Inside, layered between old agency journals and burned CDs from college, was the photo. The original one, all of us. The Thanksgiving years ago when I still thought showing up would earn me something. Melis in her ivory sweater. Ellery already half checked out. Zinnia front and center, arm wrapped around me, but not tightly. My face right there, not erased, not cropped, just present. I walked to the mantel, picked up the version from their house that I had stolen before I left. Same frame, same pose. Only in that one, I was gone. They didn't just exclude me. They rewrote history while I was still breathing. I set the altered version aside, placed the real one in its place, not for nostalgia, not for reconciliation, but because I wanted to remember what was true. I opened my laptop and scanned through my drafts. I had written 6 emails to Melis, 3 to Zinnia. None of them were angry, some were almost conciliatory. I deleted them all without reading. You don't need closure from people still building walls. Later that afternoon, I met Vera at a bakery near the Pentagon. We sat at a window table, steam rising from our cups. "You sure you're not pressing further?" she asked. I nodded. They lost the only thing they cared about, their image. Let them live with what's left. Vera stirred her tea. "You could have burned them down." "I did," I said. "I just didn't stay to smell the smoke." Back home, I opened a fresh notebook. Not a memoir, not a tell-all, just pages for me. This isn't about justice. This is about reclamation. I wrote for an hour, maybe more. When I finished, I placed the journal beside my bag and turned to my laptop. An email sat in my inbox, an invitation to speak at a women's leadership seminar in Baltimore. Topic: Owning your story when others try to rewrite it. I replied yes. Evenings settled like a sigh. I folded laundry, played music low, let the quiet in the room sit beside me like an old friend I was finally ready to trust again. A knock at the door broke the rhythm. Not loud, just two soft taps. On the floor just outside, an envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. 5 words, written in ink that bled slightly into the grain. They're not done yet. The national morning news ran like a slow drip into the bloodstream of every home that still had cable. It was 7:03 a.m., and I sat on the floor of my apartment, coffee growing cold, legs folded, face blank. Vera was on screen, steady and clear. She didn't blink much when she spoke, which made her dangerous in the best way. The investigation confirms the insurance claim was filed using a forged death certificate, she said. Documentation predated the subject's hospitalization. Federal charges are under review. The screen flashed with the usual headshots: Malis, Ellery, Zinnia, their names under bold, merciless text, under review for intentional fraud. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything at all. I just whispered, "There it is." Zinnia's fall was fast. Her disqualification from 3 boards was announced before noon. A community grant she used to crow about was revoked. Her name disappeared from promotional materials like it had never been there. Ellery's investor circles collapsed. His old flame, Nina Corley, gave a statement. "I didn't know what he'd done, and if I had, I would have run sooner." Her voice cracked halfway through, part sympathy, part calculation. Malis tried to play it cool, issued a statement to a small-town reporter, said she was shocked and saddened by the confusion. Within hours, the internet dragged her into pieces. One comment read, "Imagine faking your daughter's death and calling it confusion." I scrolled in silence. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to outlive their lies. 3 days later, I sat across from Tallis in a closed-door deposition room. No press, no cameras, just lawyers, a recorder, and several hard copies of my testimony. The clerk asked if I wanted to pursue criminal charges. "If I chase revenge," I said, "I stay in their narrative. I'm writing my own now." Tallis didn't speak, but she nodded. The following week, I stepped onto a stage in Baltimore to deliver a keynote at the Women in Leadership Summit. The auditorium wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be. "I used to think belonging meant permission," I told them, "that someone had to make space for me at the table. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build your own and let people invite themselves in if they're worthy." When I walked off stage, people didn't cheer wildly. They stood, and they nodded. It was enough. That night, back in Arlington, I returned home to find a small box waiting outside my door. No note, no name, just tape neatly folded. Inside was a photo frame, heavy mahogany. The image inside was familiar and whole. Me, Malis, Ellery, Zinnia, all present. My arm around Zinnia, my smile real, taped to the back in a child's handwriting. I asked them to fix it. Eska, I didn't cry. Instead, I placed the frame on my office shelf, between the books I actually read and the one commendation from Langley I never hung. It didn't belong on the mantle. It belonged in the truth. A week later, as I folded sweaters into a suitcase, my phone rang. "Vera, you ready to come back?" she asked. I zipped the bag shut. "Not yet," I said. "I have one more story to tell. Mine."